The mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the anxious faces gathered around it. I sat at the far end, my hands trembling only slightly as I gripped the armrests of my chair. My son sat across from me, his lips curled into a smug smile as if he had already won some invisible war. "Dad," Dustin said, his voice coated with false sympathy, "don't take this the wrong way, but you shouldn't expect anything today. Mom and I already settled things before she passed." The words hit me like a fist to the chest. The other relatives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking between me and my son, like spectators at a cruel match. The lawyer, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Mr. Flores, if you'd let me—" But Dustin cut him off, leaning forward, his knuckles pressed against the polished table. "It's simple. You don't get a penny. This is our future now, not yours. You've had your time." A hush fell over the room. Even the ticking of the antique wall clock seemed to grow louder. My jaw clenched. For 65 years I had worked, sacrificed, and given everything to this family. And now my only son was looking at me like I was nothing but an obstacle to be swept aside. I didn't reply, not yet, because deep inside, beneath the ache and betrayal, something cold and deliberate was forming, a storm. The lawyer adjusted his papers, his tone suddenly sharper. "Actually, that's not entirely true." Dustin's smile faltered, just for a second, before he forced it back onto his face. "What do you mean?" Mom made it very clear. The lawyer slid a page from the thick folder in front of him. "There's a clause, one your mother insisted on adding, and I think, Mr. Flores, you'll be very interested in what it says." My heart pounded. Around us the air grew tense, like the seconds before lightning cracks across a summer sky. Dustin leaned back in his chair, trying to look unaffected, but I saw the twitch in his jaw. I exhaled slowly, my eyes never leaving my son's face. For the first time in years, I felt the ground shift in my favor. He thought he had buried me with his lies, with his arrogance, but he was about to learn the truth. I wasn't done yet. And this was just the beginning. I leaned back in my chair as the lawyer shuffled his papers, but my mind was already spinning, drifting back through years of sacrifice that had led us here. Every wrinkle on my hands was a receipt, every scar on my knuckles a ledger of what I had given up for my family. I remembered the first time I held Dustin in my arms, tiny, red-faced, wailing against the cold hospital air. Brianna, his mother, had been exhausted but glowing, whispering, "He's our future, Jerry. Promise me he'll have everything we didn't." I had promised, and God help me, I kept that promise too well. I worked double shifts at the power plant, coming home with coal dust in my hair and aching muscles. I missed birthday parties, school recitals, even anniversaries, all because I thought every overtime check, every extra dollar, was an investment in my son's future. I told myself I would make it up to him later. Later never came. When Dustin turned 10, Brianna insisted we buy him a computer, not a toy, not some cheap second-hand machine, but a top-of-the-line model worth more than I made in a month. "The future is digital," she said, brushing off my concerns. And I caved because I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe we were giving him an advantage. By the time he was a teenager, I realized we weren't just raising a boy. We were grooming an heir. Brianna's consulting business had taken off. Money was flowing like a river, and Dustin soaked it in like a sponge. His clothes weren't just new, they were designer. His vacations weren't to the local lake, they were to Europe. And I was just the man paying the bills behind the curtain. I used to think Dustin still looked up to me. I told myself he respected my quiet, steady presence. But I'll never forget his 17th birthday, when I suggested he join me on a fishing trip like my father once took me. He laughed, actually laughed in my face. "Dad, that's exactly the kind of loser mentality holding you back. I'm not wasting my time like you did." Loser mentality. The words had burned then, and they still burned now. I thought the years would soften him, that adulthood would teach him humility. But when Brianna and I divorced, the truth became clear. He had chosen her side completely, dismissing me as though I was an outdated appliance, something to be discarded once it had outlived its usefulness. And yet, despite everything, when Brianna passed away, I came to that will reading, not for money, not for revenge, but for closure, for the faint hope that somewhere deep inside, my son still carried a flicker of gratitude, a fragment of love for the man who had carried him on his shoulders, who had built the foundation he now stood on so proudly. Instead, I got that smug smile. The lawyer's voice cut back through my thoughts. "This clause was handwritten by your mother," he said, his tone deliberate. "She wanted to make sure no one could twist her intentions." I turned my gaze toward Dustin. His confidence was cracking, piece by piece. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than regret or sorrow. I felt the simmer of justice. He thought he had written me out of the story. But the truth was, I had been here all along, watching, waiting, and soon the reckoning would begin. The lawyer's hand hovered over the page, as though it carried more weight than the rest of the thick will combined. The room had gone silent. No one dared breathe too loudly. He cleared his throat. Clause 19, he read slowly, adjusting his glasses. In the event that my husband Jerry Flores is still alive at the time of this reading, he shall not be excluded under any circumstances. He is to inherit a full 1/3 of my estate, regardless of previous arrangements. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Dustin's smirk vanished. His face flushed crimson as he leaned forward. That's impossible. That wasn't part of the draft I saw. The lawyer raised a finger, silencing him with the quiet authority of a man who had seen too many ugly family battles to be rattled now. This clause was handwritten by your mother, signed, notarized, and added as an amendment 6 months before her death. It overrides any prior arrangements. A murmur rippled across the room. Some of the relatives exchanged glances, half shocked, half amused. For years they had witnessed the way Dustin spoke to me, the way he dismissed me as though I were an unwelcome shadow, and now, in this moment, the shadow was fighting back. I didn't move. My hands were still folded neatly on the table, but inside something snapped. 6 months before her death, Brianna had still thought of me, still remembered the man I was before ambition and greed tore us apart. She had seen what our son was becoming, and she had acted to protect me. Dad doesn't deserve this. Dustin's voice cracked as he slammed his palm against the table. He abandoned us. He was a nobody. Everything we have came from Mom, not him. The lawyer's calm gaze didn't waver. Young man, your mother clearly disagreed. I felt my lips curl into something I hadn't worn in years. A smile, sharp and deliberate. Dustin saw it, and for the first time since he was a boy, I watched fear flicker in his eyes. He thought he had locked me out of my own legacy, thought he could erase me with a signature and a sneer. But the ink on that clause had cut deeper than any of his arrogance. This was no longer about money. It was about truth. For decades, I had been silent, swallowing insults, sacrifices, and betrayal. But that silence ended here. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady, echoing in the tense chamber. Looks like your mother still trusted me, son. More than she ever trusted you. Dustin's chair scraped back violently, the sound shrieking through the room. He was unraveling, and with every second I felt my own strength return. This right here was the crack in the wall I had been waiting for. The storm was coming, and I was ready to unleash it. The lawyer's words still echoed in the room, but my focus wasn't on him anymore. It wasn't even on Dustin, though his face had gone pale, his hands clenching into fists he couldn't unclench. It was on me, because beneath the satisfaction, beneath the spark of victory, another feeling crept in, a heavy, suffocating doubt. What if this wasn't worth it? I stared at the polished table, my reflection warped in its glossy surface. 65 years of living, of giving, of carrying this family on my back. And for what? A son who saw me as disposable, a legacy tainted by greed, a house divided by ambition. My chest tightened. Maybe I should walk away, take the inheritance quietly, leave the storm to rage behind me. What good was revenge at my age? Could I really spend what Brianna left me? Or was this just pride dragging me into another battlefield I didn't need? I thought of Brianna again, her voice near the end, when her body was frail but her spirit still sharp. Promise me, Jerry, don't let them take advantage of you. At the time, I thought she meant neighbors, strangers, creditors. I didn't realize she had meant our own son. My hands trembled, and for a moment I felt small. Weak. The years of sacrifice pressed down on me like the coal dust that used to cling to my lungs after every shift. Maybe Dustin was right. Maybe I was outdated, irrelevant, clinging to a place I no longer belonged. I rubbed the worn edge of my wedding ring, still on my finger, after all these years. The gold had dulled, the engraving almost vanished, but it was the last piece of Brianna I carried every day. She wouldn't have left that clause if she didn't want me to stand my ground. But could I? Across the table, Dustin's eyes were locked on me, filled with contempt, but also with fear. He thought I might crumble, that I'd surrender the way I always had. And for a flicker of a moment, I almost did. I imagined packing a small bag, retreating into the quiet of my modest apartment, living out my days with nothing but memories and regret. letting him win, letting him believe he was right about me. The thought made my stomach turn. I straightened in my chair, the doubt still there, but now burning against something harder, sharper. Because deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't even just about family. It was about dignity, about justice. And if I walked away now, I would be betraying myself and Brianna's last wish. I wasn't ready to unleash my full plan. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I would not walk away. Not this time. I know what you're thinking. What would you do in my place? Walk away quietly, take the inheritance, and let the past stay buried? Or would you fight back, even if it meant tearing open every wound this family ever had? Because that's exactly where I found myself, staring at my son's smug face, my wife's words echoing in my mind, and the lawyer holding a paper that could change everything. This was no longer just a will. It was a weapon, and I had to decide how to use it. Tell me, would you have stayed silent, or would you have done what I was about to do? Because trust me, this story was only getting started. The lawyer's voice droned on, outlining assets and percentages, but my focus stayed on Dustin, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the table's edge. For years I had seen that look, the same expression he wore as a boy when he didn't get his way. Only now, instead of toys or privileges, it was millions of dollars at stake. Every word from the lawyer chipped away at Dustin's arrogance. 1/3 of the estate, properties, investments, a share of the consulting firm Brianna had built. All mine. I watched the color drain from his face. And suddenly, memories came rushing back. Memories he would rather forget. I remembered the months when Brianna's business was on the edge of collapse. She had taken risky contracts, gambled on clients who delayed payments, and while she chased opportunity, someone had to hold everything together at home. Dustin had been 8 then. He wanted piano lessons, summer camps, the newest sneakers. None of it came cheap. I picked up extra shifts, worked weekends, even sold my truck once just to cover the tuition his mother insisted was essential for his future. And what did Dustin do? He rolled his eyes when I came home in grease-stained uniforms, embarrassed by the smell of sweat and metal. "You don't understand success, Dad," he once told me at 14, slamming his bedroom door behind him. "You'll never understand." I swallowed that insult the way I swallowed so many others. But now, with Brianna's words written in ink and sealed by law, I realized she had understood. She had seen me. "Mr. Flores," the lawyer said, snapping me back to the present, "your portion is secured. There is no contesting this clause." Dustin shot up from his chair, his voice breaking through the tension like glass shattering. "This is a mistake. My mother would never leave him that much." The lawyer's calm gaze shifted to him. "I assure you, this was her explicit instruction. If you have doubts, I have the signed documents and video testimony from the notary." Video testimony. Dustin froze. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. I leaned forward, my voice calm, deliberate. "She knew you better than you think, son. She knew what you would try." His glare snapped toward me, filled with venom. "You don't deserve any of this." The room seemed to shrink around us, the other relatives fading into the background. It was just me and him now, father and son, locked in a battle years in the making. I wanted to shout, to remind him of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every broken promise I had endured to give him the life he had. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. Because I realized something important. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. Brianna had already done it for me. The lawyer continued, his tone steady, listing accounts, assets, obligations. But I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, already moving forward, already piecing together how to use this unexpected advantage. Dustin thought this was about money. He thought if he pushed hard enough, he could still bully me into surrender. But this wasn't about money. It was about exposing him, about making sure the world saw who he truly was. And I had just been handed the perfect weapon to do it. I tapped the table softly, the sound sharp in the silence. Dustin flinched at the noise, his composure slipping further. "You always wanted control, didn't you?" I said quietly, only loud enough for him to hear. "Well, now you're going to learn what it feels like to lose it." His eyes narrowed, his lips parting to respond, but no words came out. For once in his life, he was speechless. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. The balance of power had shifted, and I wasn't about to waste it. The meeting ended, but the battle had only just begun. The lawyer closed his folder, offering polite condolences, as though he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of my family. The others shuffled out, murmuring awkward goodbyes. But Dustin lingered, his jaw tight, his fists still balled at his sides. "You think this changes anything," he hissed, his voice sharp. "Meant only for me. You don't belong here. You never did." I rose slowly, my knees aching, but my back straight. "Funny. The law seems to disagree, and so did your mother." His eyes darkened. For a moment I saw not the boy I had raised, but a stranger, a man consumed by entitlement, blind to the sacrifices that had built his world. I walked past him, without another word, but inside something was stirring, calm, cold, deliberate. I had been underestimated for too long. That ended now. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of cheap whiskey and an old photo album. The leather cover was cracked, the corners frayed, but inside was proof of a life lived for others. Pictures of Dustin at 5, grinning with missing teeth as I held him on my shoulders at the county fair. Dustin at 10, playing piano in a rented tuxedo I had worked double shifts to afford. Dustin at 16, posing proudly with the car I'd co-signed when his credit was too weak to stand on its own. Every page told the same story. Me giving everything, him taking everything. And then my eyes fell on the ring. Brianna's wedding band, still resting in the velvet box she had left behind. The gold was scratched, the stone modest, but it was more valuable than any bank account. She had worn it through every storm, every triumph, every betrayal. I picked it up, turning it between my fingers, and for the first time since the will reading, I felt her presence. She had trusted me enough to protect myself, even from our son, and I would not waste that trust. The next morning, I made my first move. I walked into Brianna's old firm, the one she had built from nothing, and Dustin now claimed as his playground. The receptionist looked startled to see me, but I smiled politely. "Tell Mr. Flores his father is here." Minutes later, Dustin appeared, his expression tight. "You have no right to be here," he snapped. "Oh, but I do," I replied calmly, holding up a copy of the legal documents. "One-third owner, which means I have a say in how this business is run." His face went pale. I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten. Instead, I walked through the glass doors into the conference room, where framed awards lined the walls. I ran my fingers over one of the plaques, remembering how Brianna used to glow with pride when the firm won its first client. "This isn't just your empire, Dustin," I said quietly. "It's hers, and now it's mine too." His lips tightened. He wasn't used to this, me standing tall, refusing to bend, and that was exactly why it unsettled him. That night, I began laying out my plan. Not anger, not chaos. No, I would dismantle his arrogance piece by piece, the same way he had stripped me of dignity over the years. Every insult, every dismissal, every time he looked at me as though I were less. Now, I would return the favor with precision. I poured another glass of whiskey, Brianna's ring glinting in the dim light beside me. It would be my reminder, my compass, a symbol that I would carry through every step of this fight. Dustin thought he was untouchable, but he was about to learn that the man he had written off was far more dangerous than he imagined. The escalation had begun, and there would be no turning back. The next week was a blur of tension. Dustin tried everything, angry calls, late-night messages, even showing up at my apartment, pounding on the door like a debt collector. Each time I remained calm. Each time I reminded him, 1/3 is mine, whether you like it or not. But the breaking point came on a Thursday morning. I arrived at the firm early, coffee in hand, papers tucked under my arm. Employees whispered as I passed, their eyes following me. They weren't used to seeing me here. For years I had been just a shadow in the background, the father who paid the bills, the silent partner no one acknowledged. But now, with Brianna gone, they were realizing the truth. And so was Dustin. He stormed into the conference room, his tie crooked, his eyes bloodshot. "You don't belong here," he shouted, slamming a folder onto the table. "This company is mine. You're just an old man trying to relive a life you never had." The words stung, but only for a second, because I finally saw it. Fear. He was losing control, and he knew it. I laid the papers across the table one by one. Shareholder rights, voting power, access to accounts, everything the lawyer had outlined. "No, Dustin," I said softly but firmly. "This company is ours, and if you can't handle that, maybe you're not ready to run it at all." The room fell silent. A few employees glanced at one another, their loyalty shifting in the span of a heartbeat. Dustin's face twisted with rage. "You're trying to ruin me." I met his gaze without blinking. "No, I'm trying to remind you who built the foundation you're standing on. Without me, there would be no piano lessons, no private school, no second chances. Everything you are came from me, and you forgot that. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He staggered back a step, like I'd struck him. And in that moment, I knew. There was no going back. I had crossed the threshold from quiet, forgotten father to something else entirely. This wasn't just a fight over money. It was a reckoning, a battle for respect that had been denied for decades. I turned, gathering the papers into my briefcase. You wanted me gone, I said quietly, without looking at him. But I'm not going anywhere. The sound of the briefcase snapping shut echoed through the room like a gavel striking wood. Final. Absolute. When I walked out of that office, I knew the truth. Dustin would never forgive me. But that didn't matter, because forgiveness was no longer part of the plan. From this point forward, there was no peace, only justice, and I was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. For 3 days after that confrontation, silence. No angry calls, no shouting at my door, no storming into meetings, just silence. And I'll admit it, I almost believed it was over. On the 4th day, a knock at my apartment door broke the quiet. When I opened it, Dustin stood there. No suit, no tie, no arrogance carved into his expression. Instead, he looked smaller. His eyes red, his shoulders slumped. For a second, I saw the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy who used to beg me to stay up late and tell him stories. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting him in. The air smelled of rain, sharp, clean, almost hopeful. We sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where I ate alone most nights. Dustin looked around as though seeing it for the first time. No chandeliers, no marble counters, no imported art. Just peeling linoleum and a chipped mug filled with yesterday's coffee. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice cracking. "About Mom's will. About everything. I shouldn't have treated you that way." The words pierced me in ways I didn't expect. For a moment, my chest ached with something dangerously close to forgiveness. He swallowed hard, eyes glassy. "I was scared. Losing Mom, it broke me, and I guess I took it out on you. I thought if I controlled everything, I wouldn't lose anything else." I leaned back, studying him. The apology sounded real. Maybe it was. "People can change," he whispered. "Maybe we can start over." The hope in his eyes was almost enough to undo me. Almost. I wanted to believe him. God knows I did. A lifetime of sacrifices, all for this boy. Surely some part of him still loved me, still wanted me in his life. But then I noticed his hand, resting near his phone on the table, screen glowing faintly. A message half typed, and in the reflection on the screen, just for a second, I saw the words, "He's breaking. Lawyer says we can contest." My stomach turned to ice. He wasn't here to reconcile. He was here to probe, to test if I would crumble, to gather ammunition for his next strike. The apology was a performance. The tears, the slumped shoulders, the voice full of regret. It was all theater. My brief flicker of hope vanished like smoke. I stood, walking to the window, rain streaking the glass. My reflection looked back at me, older, warier, but sharper than ever. "I appreciate the words," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But words don't change the past, and they won't change what's coming." Behind me, Dustin shifted in his chair. The mask of vulnerability slipped just enough for me to glimpse the truth. His eyes were cold again, calculating. He thought he had fooled me, but he had only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. 2 days later, I received a call from the lawyer's office. His voice was calm, professional, but the words sent a chill down my spine. "Mr. Flores," he said, "I think you should come in. There's another document you haven't seen." Another document? I drove downtown, rain tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers. When I arrived, the lawyer slid a sealed envelope across the table. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. "Brianna's—" "Your wife left this with me privately," he explained. "She said it was only to be opened if things got complicated." My hand shook as I tore the seal. Inside was a letter, written in her graceful script. "Jerry, if you're reading this, then I know our son has tried to shut you out. I feared this day would come. That's why I left more than just the clause in the will. I left evidence. Evidence of what Dustin has been doing behind your back." My heart pounded as I flipped through the attached documents. Bank statements, transfers, company accounts funneled into places they didn't belong. Shell companies, hidden expenses. Fraud. Dustin hadn't just been greedy. He had been stealing, not just from me, but from Brianna's company, from her legacy. The lawyer leaned forward, his eyes steady. Your wife suspected mismanagement. She hired a private auditor before she passed. Everything is here. If you choose to act on it, your son could face serious consequences. I sank back into my chair, the letter trembling in my hands. Brianna had known. She had seen the rot growing in the very empire she built. And she had trusted me to be the one to confront it. For years, Dustin had called me weak, useless, outdated. And all the while, he had been the one hollowing out the very foundation he claimed as his own. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. The irony was almost too much to bear. The lawyer's voice cut through my thoughts. Mr. Flores, I must warn you. If you use this, it will destroy him. I closed the folder slowly, my reflection staring back at me in the polished wood of the desk. Destroy him. For a moment I hesitated. He was still my son, flesh of my flesh. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike, holding him steady as he wobbled down the sidewalk. I remembered late nights sitting at his bedside when fevers kept him awake, whispering stories until he fell asleep. But those memories were shadows, long buried under years of contempt. And now I had proof, not just of betrayal, but of corruption. Brianna hadn't left me just an inheritance. She had left me a weapon, and with it the power to do what she couldn't. I slipped the letter back into the envelope, my hands steady now. Dustin thought he was fighting for money, but he didn't realize the game had changed. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about survival. And for the first time, I was holding all the cards. Imagine this. You open a letter from the woman you loved, the woman you thought you had lost completely, and inside, she hands you the very key to your enemy's downfall. But what if that enemy is your own son? That was the choice staring me in the face. In my hands, I held the truth, evidence that could destroy him, strip him of everything he thought was untouchable. Would you use it? Would you protect your spouse's legacy, even if it meant tearing your own blood apart? Because that was the line I now stood on. And the next step I took would change everything forever. The annual shareholders' meeting had always been Brianna's stage. She would stride into the conference hall in a tailored suit, her voice commanding, her vision clear. Now, for the first time, she wasn't there. Instead, it was Dustin who took the podium. He looked sharp, polished, rehearsed. He spoke about growth, expansion, new opportunities, words that sounded impressive, but rang hollow to my ears. I sat near the front, silent, watching him spin his web. The employees clapped politely, though I noticed the hesitation in their eyes. Whispers had already begun circulating. Missed payments, delayed salaries, contracts slipping through his fingers. The rot Brianna had warned me about was starting to show. And that was when my moment arrived. When the floor opened for questions, I stood. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. I have a question, I said, loud enough for the room to hush. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some widened in recognition. Jerry Flores, the forgotten husband, the quiet father. Dustin's smile faltered. Dad, this isn't... I raised the folder high, the one Brianna had left me. How do you explain these? The room shifted like a wave crashing. Murmurs spread as I laid the documents across the front table. Numbers, transfers, hidden accounts, evidence of fraud in black and white. Dustin's face drained of color. That's not. Those are taken out of context. Context? I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. The context is this company was built by your mother's sweat and sacrifice, and while she was dying, you were bleeding it dry behind her back. Gasps filled the room. Phones came out, cameras clicking. This wasn't just a private confrontation anymore. This was public. Dustin tried to laugh, but it came out strained. He's lying. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's old, confused. The lawyer's voice cut through the noise. He had been sitting quietly in the back, waiting for this moment. Actually, Mr. Flores is correct. These documents were notarized and verified by a private auditor your mother hired before she passed. The evidence is irrefutable. The silence that followed was deafening. Dustin's composure shattered. He pounded the podium with his fist, his voice cracking. You're all fools if you believe this. He's trying to steal everything from me. But it was too late. The room had already turned. Executives whispered. Employees shook their heads. Some stared at Dustin with open disgust. And me, I simply stood there, the folder in my hands, Brianna's handwriting echoing in my mind. Don't let them take advantage of you. For years, I had been silent, ignored, invisible. But now, with the truth laid bare for everyone to see, I wasn't invisible anymore. And this was only the beginning of his fall. The room erupted. Voices rose. Chairs scraped back. The once controlled meeting dissolving into chaos. Shareholders demanded answers. Employees whispered furiously. Reporters from the local business journal scribbled notes with wide eyes. Destin stood frozen at the podium, his mask of confidence shattered. The sweat glistened on his forehead, his tie crooked as he fumbled for words that refused to come. "Listen," he stammered, his voice trembling. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was reinvesting. That's what those transfers were. Reinvestment!" The laughter that followed was cruel, sharp, final. A few shareholders shook their heads, muttering about breach of trust and criminal liability. I stayed silent, watching him unravel. There was no need to shout, no need to add more words. The documents spoke louder than I ever could. The lawyer stepped forward, his voice carrying authority. "Given this evidence, the board will need to convene immediately. Mr. Flores," he looked directly at me, "as one of the primary shareholders, you have the right to request an emergency vote of confidence regarding leadership." Dustin's head snapped toward me, panic blazing in his eyes. "Dad, don't, please." The word "Dad" hit the air like a desperate lifeline. For a split second, I saw the little boy again, the boy who once clung to my hand crossing the street, who once believed I was his entire world. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man who had betrayed his mother's legacy, who had tried to erase me from existence. I raised my hand. "I request the vote." Gasps rippled through the hall. Dustin's knees buckled, and he gripped the podium as though it were the only thing holding him upright. The board members exchanged glances, then nodded. One by one, the votes were cast. No confidence, no confidence, no confidence. When the final tally was read, Dustin's face collapsed, removed. Effective immediately, his mouth opened as if to protest. But nothing came out. Only silence. And in that silence, his empire crumbled. I closed the folder, sliding it back into my briefcase. The weight that had pressed on my chest for decades lifted, replaced by something sharp and clean. Justice. As I turned to leave, Dustin called out, his voice hoarse. "You've ruined me." I stopped at the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. I didn't turn around. "No, son," I said softly, my voice steady, final. "You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone else saw it." And with that, I walked out. Not as the forgotten father, not as the silent man in the shadows, but as someone who had reclaimed his place. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to tell me that the story had changed forever. And Dustin's reign of arrogance was over. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, as though the storm had finally passed. For the first time in years, I woke up without the weight of dread pressing on my chest. No more angry calls, no more battles fought in silence. Just calm. The board wasted no time. An interim director was appointed. Someone Brianna had once mentored. Someone who still carried her values. The employees seemed relieved. The tension that had clung to the hallways dissolving almost overnight. Business stabilized. Confidence returned. As for Dustin, the fallout was swift. The evidence couldn't be ignored. Investigations began. Accounts were frozen. He was stripped of authority, his name whispered with pity and disdain, instead of admiration. Reporters hounded him. Headlines painted him as reckless, arrogant, and dishonest. And though a part of me ached because he was still my son, I knew it had to happen. He needed to face the consequences of his choices. I stayed away from the spotlight. No interviews, no statements. That was never my way. Instead, I found myself back in the small apartment, the walls lined with photo frames I hadn't dusted in years. But now, those photos didn't ache the way they used to. They reminded me of battles fought, lessons learned, and a love that even fractured had shaped me. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, Brianna's wedding ring still resting in its velvet box. I turned it slowly between my fingers, feeling the grooves worn down by time. It was no longer just a ring. It was a promise kept. She had trusted me to defend myself, to defend her legacy, and I had done exactly that. The phone rang. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but when I saw the name on the screen, my heart clenched. Dustin. I hesitated before answering. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know I'm sorry." The words lingered in the silence between us. I didn't respond right away. There was too much history, too many wounds. Finally, I said, "Sorry won't change what you did, but maybe it's a start." We both knew it wasn't reconciliation. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was something. After the call, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered below, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. The man who had been silenced, dismissed, underestimated, that man was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, someone who had fought back and won. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was simply the quiet knowledge that the truth had been seen, that dignity had been restored. And as the night air brushed against my face, I whispered into the dark a message meant for Brianna. We did it! Months passed. Seasons shifted. What once felt like the end of my world had slowly become the beginning of something new. The whispers about Dustin faded into background noise. The investigations continued, and he faced hearings that stripped him of the arrogance he once wore like a crown. I didn't attend those proceedings. They weren't mine to witness. I had already fought my battle. Instead, I focused on building something different, something I should have done long ago. I started volunteering at a local community center. It was nothing glamorous. Fixing broken chairs, repainting faded walls, teaching kids how to use tools properly. But the work brought me a kind of peace I hadn't known before. Every nail hammered, every wall patched, felt like stitching up the holes in my own life. One afternoon, a boy named Alex lingered after class, his eyes wide with curiosity as I showed him how to sand wood. You really built houses, mister? He asked. Yeah, I said, smiling faintly. From the ground up. Took years, but it was worth it. His face lit up. I want to do that someday. And in that moment, I realized something. Legacy wasn't just about money or property or names etched on company plaques. Legacy was what you passed down through your actions, your presence, the quiet lessons you left behind. That night, I pulled out Brianna's ring again. But this time, I didn't just stare at it. I slipped it onto a chain and wore it around my neck, close to my heart. Not as a symbol of grief, but of strength, of survival. My apartment no longer felt like a cage. I added plants, photos, even built a wooden shelf by hand. For the first time since Brianna's death, the place felt like a home. And then there was Dustin. He called occasionally, short conversations, awkward pauses. Once he even stopped by. He didn't wear his suits anymore. His eyes seemed older, humbled, as though the weight of his downfall had finally taught him something. We sat in silence for a long time, just drinking coffee. No shouting, no accusations. Just silence, and maybe that was enough for now. I didn't forgive him completely. I don't know if I ever will. But I no longer carried the same burning rage. I had released it, let it turn into something else. Resolve, clarity, peace. Because revenge had never really been the end goal. It had only been the door I had to walk through to reach myself again. Now, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't just see an old man worn down by betrayal. I saw someone who had fought, survived, and risen stronger. Brianna's voice echoed in my mind, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. Promise me, Jerry, don't let them take advantage of you. I kept that promise, and in doing so I discovered something greater. I hadn't just restored my dignity, I had rebuilt my life. As spring arrived, the city bloomed with fresh color. I stood on my balcony, the air warm, the streets below alive with laughter. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking backward. I was looking forward. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. In the end, I learned something I should have known all along. Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by loyalty, respect, and the choices we make when no one is watching. My son tried to erase me, but in doing so, he revealed who he truly was. And I discovered who I had always been. Stronger, smarter, still standing. So now I'll ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away, or would you have fought back until the truth came out? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you believe justice should always find its way, don't forget to subscribe, because this was my story, and justice in the end was mine.